Welcome to the Freedom Real Estate Podcast with your boy Artem and your host Andrew Freed. And we're going to talk to you today about contractors.
Ooh, we got a juicy one for you guys today. First up, we'll be talking about contractors. All right, Andrew, I'd say let's just jump right into it.
Sounds good. So, when it comes to hiring a contractor, it's all about expectations, right? And you should provide them a clear scope of work up front. And that means you want to be very clear about everything you want with this particular project. We're talking about, how many windows you want replaced. What do you want to do with the cabinets? What do you want to do with the flooring? Even down to the quarter round, you want to be very specific about everything you want so everybody's expectations are aligned.
Yeah, I would say it's better to err on the side of way too much detail than not enough, because oftentimes you might say, oh, just put up some cabinets, and they'll put up some cabinets and all of a sudden there's no door handles. Well, you didn't specify the door handles, or they weren't the right color. And any little change that you want to do after the fact, they're going to say, oh, that's an extra $1,000 to make that change order. Oh, well, you didn't say you wanted this color. It's going to be much more expensive. And it's way, way, way better to get all those details up front before you're starting the contract, before you get that signature.
I know, like one of the most common things people forget, and I don't understand why people forget this, but I forgot it when I started buying rentals. Blinds. Like, who needs blinds, right? But everybody needs blinds. Yeah. Nobody wants to look inside of your nobody wants people to look inside of your unit, right? But those are very expensive. You're talking $20, $30, $40 a blind. Then you got to pay, $50, $60 to hang them. All in all, you're talking a couple grand to do blinds, right? So having that specified in the contract, among other things, is extremely important, right?
I would say, if you can, get a little printout. You can get these online anywhere. Maybe your lender will even provide them. But every single detail of every single room, it'll say like room 1, window, what type, what size, what, everything. Cabinets, what size, what type, what trim, what style, shaker cabinets versus regular. Do you want like the full frame door handle, or do you want the little knob? And make sure nothing goes unchecked.
Yes, and theoretically, right? Like Artem made it sound extremely complex, but the truth of the matter is, you only have to do that once, right? If you're buying rental units, you're turning them all the same way. It's the same exact scope, time and time again.
Yes, and if you're working with the same contractor over and over, they'll learn your system. They'll learn what your preferences are, and then you can just go in and say, I want the usual, and they'll more or less get it.
Exactly. But now when it comes to hiring good contractors, right? Obviously, you want to be very specific about your scope work and manage expectations, right? When it comes to the actual work, but you also want to manage expectations when it comes to the payment schedule, right? And you want to be very particular about how you set up payment. So, as work is complete, they get paid, right? You don't want it to be mismatched where the contractor gets more money than the work performed, ends up not completing the work, walk away, and then you lost out money in the process, right? So typically what I like to do is I like to do quarter payments, as there's milestones throughout, 4 quarters, 25% each, potentially a third, right? But I do like to have the payments I do like to have the payments separated throughout the life of the project and have them milestone based.
2 scenarios I'll actually add to that. The first scenario is you might have a lender, and the lender might have their own schedule. So if you're looking at, some rough finishes, then inspections, then, the finish work, which is like paint, cabinets, etc., but you're not aligned with your contractor might demand way more money sooner than you're ready to pay that your lender's not paying out. So you want to get those aligned. So if your contractor is saying, oh, I want third, but based on what the lender says, it's actually better to do quarter, get your contractor to match what the lender says. And the second scenario is if you have some of these contractors that are kind of fly by night, or maybe they're just not very official or organized, and say, oh, I don't really do it that way, just pay me in the end, or, oh, just give me half now, half later, and you don't have it spelled out in the contractor. We actually had a contractor that says, yeah, I don't do it that way, and they didn't even have a written document for us with all the steps. They just said, new roof, this price, that's it. And there's way more that goes to it than that, especially with inspections. And you want to force them to do that contract because that will create problems for you in the future.
So, I think we first talk about managing expectations and establishing a clear scope, right? The next, obviously, is establishing a payment schedule with specific milestones. And the third thing you should really focus on when hiring a contractor is vetting the right contractor and getting multiple quotes. So typically for large jobs, we typically get 2 to 3 quotes, right? Just because we really need to ensure that our costs are really aligned with the budget, right? So typically we get 3 quotes for every job, and we decide based off, availability and timeline and cost.
And the point about getting multiple quotes is incredibly, incredibly important to follow. Don't ever relax. This is one rule where you really shouldn't fall into that pitfall of getting comfortable or, oh, this contractor's done so much work for me, he always gives me a good price. Even if this is job number 10 with this same exact contractor and you know his work and pricing, still get multiple quotes, because you never know. Maybe they start to slowly creep up in price. Maybe a new guy on the block comes to town and he's a little bit cheaper and a little bit better quality because he's trying to get new business. Or just maybe your guy thinks that you're good for it and he'll start to upcharge you without you even noticing, because that's just the nature of the game. Is, good contractors may be good for now, but they may get worse later.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick example. Like two of my best contractors, right? They end up becoming friends, right? And obviously when they're friends and they give me quotes, they do some insider trading, right? They're collaborating based on pricing. So it's very important I get multiple quotes for jobs, even if I have trusted contractors, just to keep them honest.
Exactly.
More on that point of trust, right? I think one of the most important things is not only hiring the right contractor, but managing the relationship throughout, so everybody is really happy with how the project's going. Ultimately, nobody likes to be micromanaged, right? So you don't want to be like all over them regarding every step of the way, but you also want to keep them honest and keep them in conjunction with the timelines needed to get this project done in accordance with the business plan.
Exactly. A lot of times, if you get too friendly with them and you're starting to cross that a relationship boundary from the client and manager perspective into the friend-to-friend perspective, they start getting a little bit more lenient, or they say, oh yeah, I'll get it done, and a week goes by and they say, oh, come on, give me another week, and you're not being strict with them, which is going to hurt your project and your timelines.
Yeah, ultimately this comes back to having a very strong payment schedule with milestones, because ultimately you can really hold the carrot in the front of their head in regards to getting paid, right? So having clear milestones is very important, but not only that, it's a reciprocal relationship, right? You want your contractor to perform, but at the same time, he wants you to perform as a client. And what does that mean? That means pay them timely and quickly, right? So one strategy me and my partners like to utilize is utilizing e-checks or deluxe checks that allow us to email checks directly to our contractors so they get paid quickly and timely, because ultimately a lot of times they're fronting the cost and they have people to pay, right? And if you delay paying them, it causes them headaches down the road, ultimately affecting your relationship.
Love it.
So now that we talked about establishing clear expectations and goals and a scope of work, right? Establishing payment schedules with clear milestones, keeping the boundary between client and friend, but ultimately ensuring it's a strong relationship, and vetting contractors to ensure what you're paying for actually adds up. These are the keys to really hiring good contractors and really keeping jobs running in accordance with your schedule and your project. So ultimately, a good contractor is a long-term partner and one you really want to keep close to your chest, because ultimately they're really the determinant between your success and failure when it comes to stabilizing your projects, right? So these are some really key strategies me and my partners utilize to hire good contractors, manage them right, and ensure the project goes in accordance with how you're actually planning on it performing.
Love it. Couldn't have said it better myself, Andrew.
So Artem, let me ask you this. What is your favorite thing about real estate?
Not dealing with leaky toilets in the middle of the night.
I thought you were going to say evictions. That's actually our next topic, evictions. And the process when it comes to evictions and how understanding can really protect your properties.
I would say one caveat to this. Ideally, you don't actually have to run into an eviction, but if you do, just go with an eviction attorney, go with a lawyer. Don't try to do it yourself. You're going to make way too many mistakes. But in any case, we're going to talk about the process.
Exactly. So I think if you have any takeaway from this video, if you only remember one thing, hire an eviction attorney, right? It's the best money you've ever spent, because ultimately, I was cheap. I went the route of not hiring the eviction attorney. What did it cost me? 4 to 6 months of vacancy.
Having to start the process over multiple times. You filled out the form with one letter on or an apostrophe missing.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. I think the truth of the matter is you will make a mistake, and it's better just hand it off to a professional.
Love it. So to start the process, there's basically two paths of avenue. One is if you have an issue with the tenant, meaning they're not paying rent, they're trashing the place, or they're violating their lease agreement. And the other one is non-cause, which is you just want them out and they're tenant at will, and essentially they just won't leave. And the first step in both of these processes is to issue a notice to quit, which is basically not exactly an official binding eviction, but it's basically telling them we're starting the process of the eviction and you need to hand this to the tenant at the first sign of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And typically that's what you do is hand them a notice to quit. But, you know, there are specific times where you just aren't renewing somebody's lease, right? So in that particular case, you're providing a notice to vacate, right? And you can do an eviction for a couple different reasons. Non-payment, but also them not vacating a unit. Like I've had evictions done where the tenant was paying on time. They just weren't leaving the unit when I asked them to leave because I wanted to renovate it. I obviously wanted to get more rent, right? So, you know, there's multiple different avenues you can have when it comes to an eviction.
And from that point, that is when you hand it over to the eviction attorney.
So, you know, I think we discussed, you know, the need to hire an eviction attorney and kind of, you know, the process of what an eviction is, right? But, I mean, typically in these states where they're tenant friendly, you want to search avenues that, like, aren't the actual formal eviction. Because in Massachusetts, like, typically an eviction may last from 3 to 6 months, right? Like, you give somebody a notice to quit, you know, it takes 30 days from them not paying rent, and then you have to send it to a judge to get a court date, which is typically 30 to 60 days from that point, and then the judge can make a judgment which could extend their stay longer, or they could get kicked out, which may be, you know, 3-4 weeks from there. So as you can see, the whole process could be 3 to 6 months, right?
And once that process starts, that's basically license for them to just not pay you rent at all during the entire time.
Exactly. So you really gotta, like, do an ROI calculation. You really can't think of it from a perspective of like, oh, this tenant's not paying me. At a principle, I'm going to go through the process. That's not how you make money in business. You actually have to think from a return on investment standpoint, right? So if this person's not paying you rent, and you could potentially, their rent's $2,000 and you could pay them $2,000 to leave versus have 6 months of a non-paying tenant, right? Like that would equal $12,000 in lost rent. Like, what do you think the smarter decision is?
Definitely cash for keys as your first line of defense.
Exactly. So you want to start the eviction process no matter what, but in the middle of the eviction process, you're going to want to try to negotiate cash for keys, which will ultimately save you money in the long run.
Or even in the beginning, to be honest.
Yeah, true.
The next point is to document everything. This is actually an important step where you really don't want to be doing too much communication with your tenant, because any text, any email, anything that can be shown to a judge probably will be used against you in some way. So let the professionals do all the communicating for you, unless it's maybe a phone call. The point here is to not say too much, not give too much of a reason or explanation, because you probably don't know the letter of the law to the T, and even a lot of lawyers don't. So you really don't want to make too many mistakes that leave you open or liable for getting thrown out in court.
Exactly. I mean, ultimately, anybody can sue anybody for anything, right? So you definitely want to, you know, less is more a lot of times, and you're going to want to document everything.
And document not even just communications, the condition of the property, any damage that they cause. Take a picture of it before they try to clean it up.
Document receipts, right? Like if this person's complaining about pest issues, send a pest person out there and have their receipt and invoice available if anybody asks for it.
Exactly.
I think ultimately, like, we're talking about an eviction, right? We're talking about being in a scenario where you have a non-paying tenant, but you got to really think about it. What is the root cause of the problem, right? Ultimately, if it's not an inherited tenant, it's your leasing practices. And you really have to be diligent about utilizing the correct leasing practices, right? And what I'm talking about is, you know, placing somebody in a unit that makes 3 times the rental income, that has, you know, a 650 plus credit score, has good prior landlord history. You know, you can even ask for their bank statements to see if they have 6 months of rent to show if they're financially stable to be able to take on this unit, right? There are multiple things you can do proactively to avoid an eviction in the future in your portfolio. So Artem, let me ask you this. What are your main takeaways from this eviction conversation?
Get an eviction attorney. Don't try to do it yourself.
Totally.
So in conclusion, always get an eviction attorney.
Yeah.
The first lines of defense are always have a good vetting process so you don't even get into the situation in the first place. Mm-hmm. If you do, go for cash for keys. Always going to be cheaper than hiring an attorney. And lastly, if you do have to go through this process, don't try to do it yourself. Document everything. Let the professional do the communications for you. Do not leave yourself open to getting thrown out in court.
And I think the last point I really want to make is don't believe in the sob story, right? If your tenant's telling you something, like it's all right to believe them, but continue with the process to protect you down the road, right? So many times I've heard from landlords, I was going to send them to eviction, but then they gave me this, a date on when they were going to pay me and never paid me, right? Go through with the eviction process because ultimately that's your leverage to push the other. Ultimately, that's your leverage to really get them out, even if you want to seek a cash for keys situation or ultimately have to go through the legal process.
And last point, honestly, don't be afraid of this. If you're going to be a landlord for more than a year or two, you're probably going to run into it at some point. The best tenants can lose their jobs or get hooked on drugs. Things happen. You're probably sooner or later going to run into it. Don't try to avoid it. Just accept it.
It's unavoidable. I've been a landlord 3 or 4 years. I have hundreds of units. Once you have enough units, things will happen.
Yep.
I've had 3 or 4 people die in my units, and it's just a probability thing, right? And evictions are the same thing. If you want to be a landlord, it's just part of the business.
Yep. Now, this next one is one of Andrew's favorite topics, maximizing ROI through maximizing the use of your square footage.
One of the most interesting places that I can think about is Tokyo, right? And the reason why it's so interesting is because they maximize every single inch in that place, right? And it's the same with value add, multifamily value add real estate in general, right? If you can find creative ways to maximize square footage and create square footage, you're essentially creating dollars.
An easy example, so here in the Northeast where we are, for some reason, in old houses, people used to love this whole dining room and living room situation. But today, almost everybody eats in front of the TV. Nobody really gets together anymore. Those dining rooms can be converted into an extra bedroom, boom, and you just increase your cash flow just like that.
Yeah, sometimes it's as simple as just adding a couple partitions, a door, and a closet. It might be as little as $3,000 to $5,000 in carpentry work, and you could literally increase the rent of that unit by $300, $400, $500 per month.
Yeah. Another idea is towards the Worcester area, there's a lot of kitchens that have a very large lawn pantry, and they're usually either next to a sink or some walls that have pipes in them. That's an easy second bathroom add.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Easily, you could turn it from a 4-bed, 1-bath to a 4-bed, 2-bath, right? Or a lot of times in these triple deckers, they have these front common area and back common area with a shed or storage area, right? You could convert that shed or storage area into more living space, more square footage, right? And the reason why that's so important is because appraisers, people who value real estate, one of the biggest approaches they take is the square footage approach. They figure out what the price per square foot is in that area, and they times it by the square footage of that building, right? So if you bring your building from 4,000 square feet to 4,400 square feet, in a sense, you're increasing the value by almost 10%.
Exactly. And on top of that, attics and basements, even if they can't be converted into legal living space, you could still make it into useful space, storage, additional places that tenants can use versus just dead space. And a lot of times it's pretty cheap. It's usually just insulation, sheetrock, and paint. So these are just some of the ideas how you can do some small, simple value adds that really maximize your square footage of your house.
So one of the most underutilized areas that I see when it comes to square footage is attic space, right? People can convert attic space to legal square footage. You can actually add bedrooms that way. On multiple occasions, I'll buy a 4-unit property with it has a walk-up 3rd floor that's pretty much attic space that you could convert into legal square footage and add bedrooms to those units to the 2nd floor, right? easy way to add thousands of dollars in monthly revenue by simply throwing up some sheetrock, some electrical wire, and a closet. Another thing I think people should realize when it comes to finding square footage and finding value in multifamily or rental real estate is understanding the average square footage per bedroom count of a unit, right? And what do I mean by that, Artem? So what I really mean by that is like for a 1-bed unit, typically that might be 700 square feet, right? 2-bed unit, typically 800 to 900 square feet. 3-bedroom unit, 900 to 1100 square feet. 4-bedroom unit, 1200 square feet plus, right? So if I run across a 2-bed unit that's over 1200 square feet, I guarantee there's some bedrooms in there that I can turn to 2 bedrooms simply by adding some walls and a hallway, right? So understanding average square footage based off the bedroom count of that unit is extremely important for potentially finding free bedrooms, essentially increasing the revenue in that unit by hundreds of dollars per month.
On the flip side, if you see a triple decker that's only 2,000 square feet, that is definitely an unutilized attic or basement, and I want to get in there and see what I can do to increase the value of that property.
Exactly. So one of my biggest things I look for is the bedroom count versus the square footage, right? If I see a huge mismatch between the bedroom count and the square footage, that's an easy indicator to me that there's value to be made.
Nice. So in closing, maximize square footage. That is a very, very, very easy way to increase the value of your property. Get creative. And that is our episode for this week, folks. Andrew, what have you been up to lately? Read any good books? Do any cool trips that coming up you're excited about?
I'm reading a really good book right now by Ray Dalio. You know who Ray Dalio is?
Yeah, The Economist. Ray Dalio, that's one of the world's most renowned hedge fund managers, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, billions and billions of dollars under management.
Let me guess, Principles.
Yes, Principles, his book.
Oh, I love that one.
Oh my God, it's so good, right? But one of the key principles in that book that I really like is ultimately like he comes up with like, when it comes to decision making, one of the biggest factors he takes into account is, having 2 or 3 very smart people in a room, but he also gives them a weighted believability score, right?
I like that.
Which is really important when it comes to decision making. And what do I mean by that? So like, if I'm having trouble having closing a property, right? And I have the ability to seek guidance from my closing attorney who's done thousands of closings, right? Obviously, his believability score is weighted higher because he's done that trade a bunch, right? Versus if I went to a plumber and asked him what I should do in this closing, let me ask you this: how high do you think his believability score is?
Probably a 2 out of 10.
Yeah, very, very low, right? So I think it's really important to, seek counsel from experts, but not only that, weigh somebody's believability score on their opinion on whether it should affect your solution or not.
Love it. I read that book quite a few years ago, and one of the biggest takeaways for me was rules-based decision making and having default decisions for things. So for example, if you're trying to lose weight, have the rule that when you're in the grocery store, you only shop around the perimeter where it's usually like the fruits and vegetables and like the deli section, and don't go in the middle of the aisles where there's processed foods and basically snacks and healthy stuff. And that's it. Like, it's out of my hands. It's a rule. If it's not on the outskirts of the grocery store, I don't buy it. I just don't go there. Or I just, don't go to these types of places where I know I'm going to run into, whatever bad people, or I don't drink on, weekends because I know I'm going to go into a bender. Have these default rules for yourself. And that makes life easier because you're not spending a lot of mental energy having to remake that same decision over and over.
Yeah, I mean, great book with a ton of really good lessons. If you want a really good read that you could consume time and time again, Ray Dalio's Principles is definitely it.
Love it. And if you want to listen to the audiobook, he actually reads it himself, which is a lot of fun.
I know that. Interesting.
Yeah. All right, guys, that's this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week on the free, do it with me, on the Free Real Estate Podcast.